you want.
So today we're with Mariana Enríquez, which is the third interview we've done as part of our Desperate Literature kind of prize chats. I'm going to introduce Mariana, and then we'll have for those of you who don't know her and should, we will then have a quick chat. So we're here today with Mariana Enríquez, and we're absolutely thrilled to have you as a judge for our 2023 prize. Mariana is one of the most spellbinding narrators in Latin American literature. A story collection, Los Peligros de Fumar en la Cama, The Dangers of Smoking in Bed, was shortlisted for the 2021 International Booker and a finalist of the Kirkus Prize. She's been featured in countless anthologies and magazines, including The New Yorker, Freeman's, McSweeney's, Granta UK, Granta en Español, and Asymptote. Her novel Nuestra Parte de Noche won the Herralde Prize in 2019, Premio Celsius and the Premio Kelvin 505, and most notably the Premio de la Crítica in 2019. And this came out last year with Granta as Our Share of Night. And we're still waiting, Mariana, for some of your nonfiction to make it out into English, but I'm hoping that'll come soon. Ishiguro Kazuo Ishiguro said that Mariana Enríquez is one of the most exciting discoveries he's made in fiction for some time. So it's a real honor to be chatting with you today. Yeah, how are you? You were telling me that they're just the end of a heat wave, so you're feeling
Yeah. So I'm feeling better. Yeah, but yeah, I'm okay. Thank you very much for inviting me and for doing this.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So you're in Buenos Aires at the moment.
Yeah, living and working here.
So I guess the reason I kind of just very quickly asked that just so everyone kind of sets the tone and people sort of know where you are is because I was wondering if you do a lot of writing in other places than Buenos Aires, and if you do, if that sets the tone of flavor of like how you're writing where you are, or do you just get in a bubble and just go?
I like working here. I'm used to working here, and I don't really enjoy working when I'm traveling. I think many people wonder how is the life of the writer that travel, that not everybody and not everybody wants to do it, to go to festivals or to travel around, or to go, or when you have translations, to go with your book when they ask you to. But it's very apart from having great dinners and meeting people, it's mostly escaping to see stuff. In my case, because I love cemeteries and I love art, it's escaping to see some exhibition or some cemetery, some place, or if a band is there, but it's mostly like pretending that you have a headache and going to some concert. Like, it's very much a lot of work. And especially when it's not your language. Like in English I can manage, and in French I can understand, I can speak it. Who can speak French? So it's not French, but I can understand it. So there are two places that it's kind of easier. But if you go to other countries, for me, it's like, and it's very difficult with the translator, and everything is very, I wouldn't say stressful, because it sounds like it's a very privileged thing to do, but it is. So to also write in that kind of environment is just too much. Like, you arrive to the hotel and you kind of want to sleep or see some, whatever on YouTube, or it's not really a creative environment to work. But it is a creative environment for me, and that's why I do it, to get stories, to meet people, to have some weird kind of experience that maybe you only just have in this kind of places. Like, I don't know, I just finished a book of short stories, and one of the short stories is set in LA. And this is because when I went to the Kirkus Prize that you just mentioned, I stayed in the Biltmore Hotel. That is a very strange place, and it's downtown. And downtown LA, I don't know if you've been there recently, but it's kind of apocalyptic.
Right.
So it came and it's there, and it's useful for me for those kind of things. But I need to be here, I think, at the moment, or in some place like I can call home, with my environment, with my books, so you can see with all this mess, to be able to. I don't like to work in places that I don't feel my own. That's, it could be other place. Doesn't have to be this city. Could be other city, but I have to make it my own some way. Bringing my toys, bringing my thingies, bringing my my music, having my space. It's very, because in that sense it is like a bubble. But I also interact a lot with the outside, so it's kind of it's a mix, really. But I need I really need my own environment, and that's at the moment includes the city,
Right.
even if I write about other places.
Right, because it's true that when you travel, sometimes there's when there's this sense that the kind of normal rules don't apply, right, and the kind of weirdness can enter in those moments.
Yeah.
That's kind of a nice feeling. When you were recently in Paris, is that right? Well, not recently, or
yeah, in January. Yeah.
Did you go to see any cemeteries? Have you done them all already, or
I've done them all.
you done them all?
I was very cold.
Oh yeah.
I went to see some weird stuff, like they have some collections of automatons, like very creepy. And there is the museum of Gustave Moreau that was like a symbolist that was absolutely insane. But they've forgotten, the Parisians. It's very strange, because when I talk to them, like, what are your influences writing, for example, they ask me, and I say the symbolists, Rimbaud, Jean Laurent, all the illustrators and Odilon Redon, that kind of symbolist era, and they're like, whoa. And you kind of had to remind them, but you had like a huge wave of horror films in the 2000s that were like all new French extremity or whatever, to put a label to them, but there were some interesting things there, and it showed how crazy you are. And you have Gaspar Noé that is totally insane, and Titan won the Cannes, and somehow they are like very there's a lot of autofiction, and they're very rational, but I think there's an underbelly of absolute madness there that they kind of decided not to touch, maybe because of the social situation that is kind of complicated, and they want to talk about that, and they are into trying to integrate the people. There's a lot of other issues, and they don't want to think about they're living on top of the catacombs, for example. And but a few years ago there was like catacomb tourism, not in the official ones, but in the other ones, like people. And so they're kind of surprised that I have those influences, but yes, they were, when they were morbid, they were very morbid. Like this, you can't go more morbid than Baudelaire, I think.
Yeah, that Moreau house is really amazing. It's like the pre-white cube type of gallery space, not just everywhere. It's really cool. I used to live there for a while. Before here. Yeah, I mean, the reason I was asking you kind of about place was because I was, when I was sort of preparing, I was looking through your translator Megan McDowell, in the back of Things With Us in the Fire. She writes this this quote, which I think sets the tone a little bit for an understanding or thinking about place. She writes, Mariana Enríquez's particular genius catches us off guard by how quickly we can slip from the familiar into a new and unknown horror. The wraiths of Argentina's violent past appear in her stories, but ultimately Enriquez's literature is not tied to any time or place. Rather, it appeals to ancient creeping fears that prowl our subconscious, and that in the worst of times are acted out on our political stage. And that was a kind of nice summary, I think, because I was listening to a bunch of interviews and reading around a bit, and about how kind of I was wondering if really, because there is a lot of focus on Argentina and the history of Argentina under the dictatorship that comes through the writing, especially in the new novel. But this balance between the kind of getting to the universal through the particular, and I think you've spoken about it too in terms of previous generations of Argentinian writers. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that for you, or how you feel that is now in writing in our age. I don't know.
Well, in terms of literature, Argentina, for better or worse, has always been a country very influenced by let's say foreign language literatures. Why? Because mainly the people that could write and was literate were immigrants, and immigrants from Europe. Even the poor immigrants, many of them were anarchists or people that were dissidents or whatever, that were very well educated because they were, political beings, let's say. So they would read Dostoevsky, or I mean, all the Russians and Mayakovsky and all the kind of stuff. And then you have the Italians that are the majority, of course, brought their own stuff with them. And then if you talk about literature, like, specifically, Borges was absolutely fascinated with British literature. And he was obsessed with Chesterton. He was, and also then his best friend, Joy Casares, was mostly a fantastic, well, it's a very weird trend of fantasy, but they were fans of Wells and that kind of thing. This is the 50s, 40s. So that kind of is the canon. So when you go to Borges, that is the canon. What is behind Borges is the Icelandic sagas, maybe, and or Goethe, and not, and also literature from here. So this kind of hybrid always happened here. It's a class thing too, because in other literatures, you can see more in Latin America. More of an influence maybe of local or the older literatures, like in Brazil, that you can go to the 17th century and find writers, but not here so much. But the looking at Europe is a characteristic of the middle and upper classes, and France too, because France was like the elegant thing. So that is a characteristic of the upper and middle classes, and coincidentally, those were the classes for a long time that were able to write. So it's a very cosmopolitan literature, and in a way, it doesn't have the locality, I find, that other literatures have. So when you go to a text of an Argentinian, sometimes it's kind of confusing because of the influences. If you read Our Share of Night, all the part that is in London, to me, it was very easy to write. That doesn't matter that that I've been like 3 or 4 times in London, but of course that is not my London, it's the 60s London. But people know about that, a lot about the 60s London here. I did some research, and a lot of that is imagination, but people know what Mary Quant is. And I'm pretty sure it's not the same. If I ask you was the most famous designer in the 60s here, and she probably was very influenced by Mary Quant. It is kind of a problem too. So when we talk about space and where are we writing from, it's difficult, because that kind of looking to Europe is also very colonial to me. But at the same time, that's the literature, and in a way the culture that I was raised in. So sometimes to do the operation, let's say, of going very local and taking very local things, it's very condescending, it's very patronizing, and it's not true, it's not honest. I think you have to be honest about what your culture is. And if your culture is a bit, obsessed with the foreign because it doesn't think it's good enough, that's something that has to be in your writing, because it was good enough. If you read Borges, it was good enough for anything. But that's like an insecurity that I really like to touch. But I kind of, in the last years, writers, because the horror that we live is not just the horror of the dictatorship, of course, and it continues in many ways, but it's like we had the heat wave I was asking you about, and some people were like 10 days without electricity in the city. Like, this was hell. I mean, and this is because the electric company is deciding to leave the country, so basically it's abandoning people. And this is a really third world problem happen with in people with a mentality like that. It's all very mixed. So I need to write about the darkness of the city, about the how we don't have electricity, and this is very local, and it happens a lot here. And I try to use like pagan saints and beliefs that are not taking us an anthropologist, but taking us stories and stuff that I heard from my grandparents or that going around. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge that my main influence is, I don't know, Alan Moore or Stephen King or Toni Morrison, because that's what you read. You read in translation all your life. And the writers, the Argentinian writers, except from very local traditions like the gaucho literature that, it's very local, it's all very hybrid. So I like to think of place as this hybridness, that I know that word doesn't exist, but it's kind of like a mental place where all these things are crossing each other all the time. But yeah, and the city is like that a lot. If you come to Buenos Aires, there's a place of Buenos Aires that in Recoleta looks like Paris. Where I live, we have the English neighborhood with semi-detached houses and whatever. You go 10 blocks down there and it's a favela. So it's kind of it's all kind of like that. And then there's the Italians that made their houses with the lions and the columns, and so it's all very mixed.
Yeah.
Like that. And in the middle you have the pagan saints, and in the middle you have the people that look like me, like very pale, and kind of, my family is from Galicia, so it's kind of the north of Spain that there's not a lot of sun, therefore. And then you have the people that are descendants from indigenous people, that are the brown people that have been neglected for a long time. It's that kind of mix that I think happens everywhere, but here it's a very strange melting pot, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. It made me think a couple of things, but actually I was rereading Ramla Triste, and it was funny because this thing about locality and the melting pot. Then when I mean, this probably happens to a lot of people when they go anywhere from there, wherever they're home. But you talk about the kind of Argentine fundamentalism and people transposing, refusing to adopt, which which is kind of picked up on the Barcelona in the Barcelona story particularly. Yeah. I wasn't. This isn't written down in one of my questions, but since about being Galician, do you have any particular attachment to the myth of Galicia? I mean, Galicia has a real strong witch tradition.
I know, but no, it's strange. It's strange because that comes from your grandparents, right? And my grandma, I didn't met my grandfather; he died very young. And my Galician grandmother, she was like, she was a communist. She didn't like superstition. She didn't like anything Like she was absolutely materialistic in the Marxist sense of the word, and so was my father. But from the side of my mom, that are, it's an Italian family, and but they lived in the north of Argentina, where everything is mixed with Brazil, with Paraguay, and with all the, the mythology of the area. So the stories came from there, not from Galicia. I'm reading about Galicia now.
Yeah.
Because I've been to Galicia doing a tour, and everybody was like, do you know about the myth of that? And I was like, at first I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
Because, it was like, and if I say, I remember my grandma, they were, these kind of things that happen in the neighborhoods, in the small neighborhoods where she lived. There were some days in Easter or something like that, that they were bringing, I don't know, an image of the Virgin for her to keep for a couple of days, and then it goes to another house. And I remember my grandmother saying, take that thing from here. Like, she was like absolutely against anything that was kind of a supernatural kind of thing. To her, everything was very, well, she was like a real communist. And it comes from the other side. That's what I mean with everything is very mixed. And about Barcelona, I just wanted to add something. Barcelona was the chosen place for Argentinians to go away, not from exile of any authoritarian regime or anything like that, but economic, financial exile, because there was no jobs there, so they went there. And one of the, where you see how the Argentinian character is so strange, is that they chose Barcelona because it's pretty. This is pretty, and but they don't speak Spanish there.
Yes.
I mean, and it's very basic to speak Catalan, and we don't speak Catalan. We don't have any idea about Catalan. So why don't you go to Madrid or anywhere else, La Coruña, Andalusia? I don't know, but you choose the place where you're going to be the foreigner forever, until you know the language. And if you know the language, even, they're going to see that you have an accent. You're going to be a foreigner in anywhere in Spain, but you will be able to understand them, and especially when they went, the whole process of independence was starting. So it got very nationalistic. Like, maybe if they went 10 years before, it wasn't that hard. But when they went, like, people were like, really, the language, Catalonia, etc. And what I mean, and this is it. So they go there to complain.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I very briefly, I've been to Galicia a few times. I had an exhibition there, I had some stuff there, and but it reminds me a lot of Yorkshire, where I'm from. So, and there's a lot of, it felt very similar, like a home, kind of not homely, but homely. It was after the pandemic, was quite nice. So I kind of got into a little bit the mythology thing.
Yeah, I have a book right here. I'm just reading the.
Nice, amazing.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm learning.
So last year we did had a chat with Atessa Moshveg, and it was just before Lapvona came out. And she's back to judge this year. And we one of the questions that I asked her was kind of about violence, or maybe depravity, I guess, as well, in her work or in her novel. And of course, this is something very relevant, very prominent in your work, and something you've spoken about a lot, sort of, as well as body horror and your attraction to this. And when you were chatting on Between the Covers about Share of Night, which is a really amazing interview for anyone listening who's interested in digging into more. It's really good. David Nyman, he asked you to talk about the specific use of horror in the book, especially against the political backdrop of Our Share of Night, the reality in itself being so horrific. And I kind of want to ask you, because in terms of the stories we get coming in, we see a lot of violence being used in the stories, but it's almost as if the violence is used as if it justifies the story itself. It's like, just by putting something supposedly shocking in the story, it kind of works as a piece, right? And sometimes it feels unrooted or unjustified for the story itself. So when David Nyman was talking to you about the violence, and your response was obviously complex, it was a complex chat, but two things really stuck out to me. One was the comment that you made about kind of distanciation, about having the distance of the fantastic or horror that allows a reader to experience or re-experience certain things that that they actually then find shocking, especially in a world where we've become so desensitized. So that was like the first thing. And then the second thing was the fact that so often your stories and the novel make you sit inside the horror in various different ways, make the reader complicit in certain way, whether from the perspective of a character who's performing it or not, or like just for instance in the carrito, this about the shopping cart, I felt as a reader kind of complicit with the family who was not touched by the curse, you know. So I felt like, and I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how you came into horror in this way, both as like a way to get people to experience certain things and having people sit inside a story where you're given horror.
Yeah. Well, the desensitized thing, it's very true to me all the time. Like, I mean, to me, violence is not, to put it like very simple, to be violence and writing about violence is not a bad, violence is not a bad word. Writing about violence is not a bad thing or a thing that needs to be justified. We live very violent lives in general. And to be timid about it in literature is something that I don't understand. You can't not, you know, in the same way you don't want to watch a violent movie, but it's kind of, you know, it's very easy to me, it's very difficult to me to understand why certain violence should not be justified. I'm not talking about the video game violence that is kind of a, but certain kind of violence, because I feel violence everywhere, and the desensitization of it everywhere, especially in Latin America. For example, nowadays I'm doing like a reading show stuff and in the theaters, and we decided not to go to a town that is like 6 hours from here, that is very near for Argentinian distances, because it's absolutely co-opted by mini narcos, and they just send the military police. And the stories you hear, not the stories you hear, the stories that happen. And that's real. So to me, I don't really do the, you know, the what should be more respectable in a way that is doing like a journalistic account of this, because I think people do it much better. And my language is the language of horror. So I do prefer to put in a real story like the language of horror, the language of a horror story, to highlight it, because I really think that the desensitization works in favor of violence. This is the thing. If you let it go, getting easy to used to things is very easy. It's amazingly easy. You start one day like letting something happen, and then in 4 months there's bodies without the head hanging from a tree. And then tomorrow they're hanging from the tree and you know, a bridge, and so on. And this is what happened in Mexico, for example, where they find a mass grave of, I don't know, you know, 100 people, and they think it's a small grave. As a teacher, for example, I give in journalism, I give my my students a lot of you know, Latin American journalism books, and there's one that is very important in Argentinian writing, that it's called Massacre, Operation Massacre. It's in the 50s, and it's some people that were killed in a by the state in a garbage dump 5 dead in the executions, political crimes. And I remember giving this book, and I had students from Colombia, from Mexico, from El Salvador and stuff, and they were absolutely bored because there was only 5 dead. And it was like, why is such a big deal? I mean, it's well written, but this is a massacre? You call this a massacre? Like, what are you talking about? So this is these instances that I get, you know, I write them down and stuff. I can see that this, how it gets desensitized, absolutely, and they're very used to it. And then when they tell you the stories, you can see the emotion coming, but not to the same degree as what the real horror was. And to me, horror as a genre reaches that degree and shocks you with that degree, and you get again the you know, the horror that should have been there in the first place. So to me, it doesn't really need justification, because I still read my stuff, and then I read the news, and I found the news more horrific. And I think it's the thing of being, no, I don't want to read about that, this triggers me, this makes me feel bad. I think that's a very kind of easy way out, you know, to reading about what's going on, and, you know, to deny the things that happen. It's another thing that I don't enjoy it, and I prefer it to keep it in real life. But it's a really easy way to, you know, go back to your little world where everything is all right and things are not. So I am a journalist too, but I don't write about that. I write about culture and arts and stuff. But weirdly, in my literature, I like to acknowledge the things are not all right. And since I don't do it with nonfiction, I do it with fantastic fiction and with horror. I don't know if that answers it, but to me, it's really, you know, it's the best language as in genre to talk about these things. And El Carrito, for example, the cart, that happened. I mean, not the curse, but what happened with the man and in the neighborhood, and how they, you know, they asked him to go away. That happened. And that the woman that was horrified was my mother, but she decided not to say anything in the neighborhood because she was scared that she was going to be accused, you know, of being oh, you're always like the, you know, the free thinker, and you kind of you're going to let these delinquents to ruin our it's not picket fences exactly, but, you know, our still nice neighborhood. And so I wrote it about her reaction. And then I wanted the reader to empathize with them, because for me, it's very difficult to understand other people's minds. And I needed a witness, or something that could tell that from outside, not from inside, the insanity of the curse. So they could describe it. So they're kind of said because of a narrative reason, you know. And but in the end, they are not. In the end, it comes to them, but later. I mean, they're trapped there. And that was the thing. And many of the things that I write about come from real events. So it's not even that I invent the violence. Like there's a story called The Dirty Kid that has a description very meticulous and detailed of the murder of a child. And I basically copied it from media. There's nothing I invented there at all. And not even the words. Mm. And people come to me and are like, how can you do that to a child? And say, I didn't do anything to that child that happened, but you forgot it. But you forgot it because there was another child the next day, and there was another mess the next day. So the child was forgotten. There was a trial, everybody's in jail. I mean, it's not that justice hasn't been done. For example, I'm not doing it like in a, you know, to make it then denouncing impunity or anything like that, just acknowledging that these things happen, and it in a way is humanly impossible to pay attention to everything, but it's humanly easy to say, you know, no, I can't read about that. But why? What is it? Well, I mean, it's like, think about it. Why? What disturbs you so much? If it's fiction, what is it? How deep is the denial? In what kind of world do you want to live? And why is it guilt because you're not doing anything? I'm not doing anything either. I'm just writing about it. But I try not to be, I don't know. To me, it's a question of, I find in general, not only in literature, like a kind of hypocrisy about stuff. Like, you know, if someone writes about abuse, it's like, but have you been abused? Are you entitled to writing about it? And it's like, does it matter? I mean, if they want to show light about it, and they have the knowledge and they have the respect, and why is it shock value, something that happens so often and that it scars people so much? It's not shock value, it's what happens. So what happens is very shock value. I mean, that's the thing. To make it shock value is, it's, to me, it's a bit problematic. Yeah.
Right, but I think one of the things that definitely happens in the novel, happens in a lot of the stories as well, of course, is that you actually, Megan McDowell also wrote this other thing. She said when the characters have to, there's this thing that happens, that when characters have to acknowledge their border position, they're not so, their position out is not so clean as they maybe wanted to think of it at the first. But I also think that happens to the reader too, right? You end up, and maybe that's why, you know, I don't know, a suggestion. I feel that's why it can be shocking, because I'm made to be completely complicit in a way. Not completely, I feel complicit, and therefore, or maybe my complicity is just shown to be actual. I'm actually shown what is already there. You know, my
yeah, that's part of it. I mean, I'm writing it, I make myself complicit too. Right. But in a way, it's acknowledging in a way that maybe we don't do atrocious things, but we have bad thoughts. We're not angels. I mean, and there's a kind of tendency of, you know, like, we're living now in a time of a lot of judgment, where you make a mistake and you're over, and we can have, you know, violent thoughts, wrong thoughts. We can make wrong things and then, you know, account for them and change our behavior. I don't think that's I don't think that's a problem. I think that it's very Puritan to think that you have to live your life completely according to some set of rules, and that you can't, you know, veer from that path ever. So that's there too. So sometimes when you read something that really is shocking, I think in a way there's something in the reader that says, but did I ever think something like that? Did I ever wish something like that to happen to someone? Do I not pay attention to this thing happening around me because I prefer to retreat to my safe space? I mean, that the words safe space together really creep me out, because that's to me, it's not protecting or anything, but it's the consummation of individualism. I go to my safe place and I'm safe there, and whatever happens to you, bye. You know. And I don't want to hear about history. I don't want to hear about history. And it's like, history is not about you. Don't be so individualistic. Don't be so vain. It's history. I mean, it's awful. It is awful. But yeah, it didn't happen to you. It happened to your grandfather. And you should respect your grandfather's history, not erase it. That's Stalinism. And, you know, the twisting of all these things into trying to make us believe that this is a culture that is more respectful when it's actually not more respectful, but it's erasing experiences and history and, yes, awful things that happen. To me, that's a problematic thing, not the other way around.
Yeah, it made me think of another thing that Tessa Moshfegh said when I was chatting to her. I'd said something along the lines of, well, I'd been reading around, and a bunch of people had said something about how a lot of her characters are unlikable.
Yeah.
And she said, she was saying something how she didn't really see her characters as unlikable, or maybe that everybody could be equally unlikable, but that she wanted to kind of allow, get in the character and just allow that to kind of go where it needed to go without kind of restraining it for any kind of overarching moral reason. And it kind of made me think about something else you'd commented about, saying how sometimes, in relation to the novel, about how sometimes writing inside the subjectivity of some of the more deplorable characters was kind of fun interesting. But I think you used the word fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, it was really fun. But because in a way, it's very you're exaggerating things that are there, and it's like writing a villain. Right, writing a villain is very fun. They're kind of stereotypical, and it's kind of, there's something clownish and cartoonish about them. But there's truth too, in at the end of it, at the core of it. So yes, to me it was very fun. And this about I write a lot of unlikable people. I think all of us are unlikable, and that we, in some aspects of our personality, and depending on the other person, and I really don't understand. Also, this is I'm probably getting very old, but I never wanted, when I was only a reader, or as a reader now, a character that you should empathize with or like. I want them to understand what they do. I want them to have a reason. To me, when they don't have a reason, that's exploitative. That's kind of that's kind of unjustified, that they don't have a reason or a motive. But for example, all the violence that Juan has, the character, is all because of many reasons. One of the reasons he wants to save is in Our Share of Night. He wants to save his child, but also another motivation that is not maybe a nice motivation is that he is jealous of that body. So, and I see that dynamic a lot in fathers and sons. Of course, it doesn't, appear in the very violent ways that appear in the book, but he envies that body, and sometimes he wants to hurt it, and he has the power and the psychological power of doing it. He submits Gaspar to a lot of abuse. And why does Gaspar still love him? Well, because sometimes you love your abuser, and that's a very complex thing. And it's very, to me, it's very simple, and re-victimizes the person to say, how can you love your abuser? Well, feelings are very complex, and when your abuser is your father, or the person you love, or whatever, you kind of choose to forgive them. You kind of find, justifications and stuff like that. And the Order, that are very, very bad, let's say, and do very bad things, the ultimate goal of them is to maintain their wealth and their power by keeping their conscience and their bodies. I wouldn't do that. I think they're awful, blah, blah. But I do understand that if you have all that wealth and all that power, you wouldn't want to die. You wouldn't want to have your body and your conscience forever and be the same person, and not leave all your money and your power to some idiot kin that you can have. You want to be you, like a vampire. It makes sense, not to give up go against nature. You know, that's the ultimate power. So they have a motive, they have a reason, and I understand what they do, even if I don't agree. That's what I look for in fiction, not to like them. To like them, you know, to like them is something that doesn't have to do, for me, with storytelling, or with it being with verisimilitude, can say, right? But what I believe is motive, and you know, and get the why, not liking them, because there's many people I don't like. So if you make, and there's many characters that you can make likable that to me are repulsive because I don't like that kind of person. So it's, you know, that you know, that or I don't care about reading about them, you know, because it's not interesting about reading about them. Now I am reading the Viceroy of Uida. It's a long forgotten novel about Bruce Chatwin, about the slaver, Brazilian slaver in today's Benin. And it's amazingly written, but also it's opening my eyes to the reality of Brazil and the slave trade and everything, that through fiction, that is absolutely amazing, that I didn't know anything about. And I, you know, I'm very thankful that that book exists and hasn't been erased, because it touches uncomfortable issues. Because those uncomfortable issues are making me understand this lingering racism in Brazil, especially, and in the whole Latin America. So, you know, it's bad things are helpful to improve yourself. It's not that you're, you know, lying in a pile of evilness. But to me, it's the contrary. I understand that people don't think like that, but this is how, you know, this is why I do it.
It's funny because I was thinking about when you were just talking about, you know, the motives of continuing life and power and wealth. I had heard previously that you've, you know, read a lot of Ursula Le Guin, and you like the Ötzi things. I really love Ötzi. I read it a lot. It's like one of my go-to books, and it took me a long time. I don't know, maybe I was too young when I first read it. To this like line underneath, which is the relationship to death that we have, and the relationship to wanting to keep and hold on to what we think we have when we really don't have any control over it. And it's a really wonderful undercurrent. And I just suddenly pulled a parallel between the two books in my head when you were talking there. Yeah. I was going to ask you about as well, because you kind of touched on it earlier, to do with research and, you know, how much you research London, for instance. But you also said that you didn't do because a lot of the novel, A Share of Night, is set in the north of Argentina. But you said that you didn't want to go back and do any, like, I don't know, research. You didn't really want to dig into it like that. You kind of want it to be based on your imagination or your memory of it. And obviously, you know, like with the internet now, anytime we're researching anything, there's a near infinite number of holes you can go down and never come out of. And if you're writing short fiction, or any fiction, but if you're writing short fiction, and in the case of our story prize, it's 2,000 words, you really don't have place for this. And I wondered if you could just tell us about the choice there, not to like want to dig into it too much in terms of hardcore research.
I think I'm a journalist too, so I'm very used to digging too much. And I dug too much in many investigations I did, and it wasn't always the best choice, though sometimes it's needed because you need to have the whole documentation, but sometimes there's a lot of documentation that you just leave apart and you don't use. But in fiction, to me, of course, there's some Googling that you do, like there's, for example, in the novel, I'm talking about this saint, San La Muerte, Saint Death. I know a lot about it because it's a saint that is quite known here, and some members of my family had a relationship to it. But for example, I couldn't remember how is the temple, because when I was young and I used to go more often to the north of Argentina, there was no temples. They were like private in houses. And now there's temples that are like public and stuff. So I Googled them and I watched them, and okay, this is the temple, that's it. You know, it's not that was the kind of very specific kind of things. To have the you know, when you go to a dead end because you find something, but only in those moments, because I think that memory, you know, the feeling that you had about those things, and making that, and improving that memory, let's say, with some things, is better than that trying to be obsessively doing a reconstruction, unless you're making a historic novel, for example, that you need that. But this is, or sure enough, it's not a historic novel. In short fiction, they're not historic, so I don't care. And in many, you would notice, because you don't live in Buenos Aires, but in some of the short stories, I put the name of two streets, and I say they're straight, but they're not. They're actually perpendicular in real life. And I didn't remember, and I didn't check it, because it's not non-fiction. It doesn't need a fact checker. It doesn't matter. It's just the name of two streets that happen in a world that is not this. So, you know, the London that is there is the London of, it's a mythic London. It's a London of the imagination. It's a London, it's probably the amount of movies that we've seen. I mean, London, LA, Rome, those are cities that, for someone that is from the outside, are very mythical places in many eras, like in many periods, and the late 60s is one of them. And so, you know, watching movies, not rewatching them, having watched the movies, having listened to the records, having read the books about the era at the moment, and thinking also always in my mind that this is the end of the era where youth became what they became, and it started like in a way, in a very innocent way, and trying to change the world, and, you know, win money in a different way than their parents. And this ends with Altamont and the deaths of Jimi Hendrix and Brian Jones, and etc. And Charles Manson and Jimmy Page worshipping and buying the house of Aleister Crowley, and that psychedelic magic becomes absolutely dark. And the Rolling Stones have like this blood sacrifice of someone in a show, and it's on film too, so you can watch it forever, that crime, in front of them, in front of our satanic majesties. So that kind of thing, that kind of, you know, sense of zeitgeist, to me was more important than how some street really look like. And also I have the fortune that I have a guy that was doing some research on fashion of that era. So he was like, I don't think there were those kind of dresses for men. It's the dress that Bowie uses in the cover of the man that what's the name? Oh, I had a lagoon now. The man that saved the world, what's the name of the record? Anyway, he's in a very, very beautiful dress on the cover. And I think the record is from 66, and he was like, I don't think in 65 where you mentioned something it existed. And he was like very, but this very specific things to not wake up the reader from the dream, if someone knows about it, no, but because it's a very, very specific kind of detail. But to me, the dream, you make it more with the zeitgeist of the era, and more with an idea of the era, that with little details. Because even in this story that I was telling you about, people that live in the city and that they know how these streets go, and it's not like that, it's like that. Very few noticed or cared about it, because they bought the pact and they understood this is fiction. This is not, if you want, you know, like AC/DC said, if you want blood, you have to go to other places. But here is, to me, it works better. because to me it gives that kind of dreamy, oniric kind of thing that you read something and it feels like a memory. And reality, when you think about it, feels more like a memory than otherwise, because that's how you process reality, not as a with a little mistakes. Let's say it's like if I ask you, what were you wearing a month from here? Unless something very important happened to you a month from here and you remember because of that, you have no idea. So you would invent it.
Right.
If you're doing out of fiction. So and that's what fiction is to me.
Yeah, and I was thinking actually when I was writing this, I'd originally just was thinking about other kind of writers or fantastical writers who don't seem to do a lot of. I was thinking of Octavia Butler. It sometimes doesn't seem, from what I can remember, that the world building is not like this epic world building, but somehow, yeah, you buy the. You're like, right, I'm right in the.
Yeah.
I'm right in the world, and there's actually, in terms of actual construction of the world around what's going on between it's not like epic, and yet I'm still right in there.
Yeah.
I have all these questions. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, tell me.
No, I was gonna say, I had all these questions now, Gozi, because just a few questions about writing short fiction, because it's a short fiction prize. But there was one thing that I wanted to ask you about, which is a bit less to do with writing. Basically, and I was fascinated because it's something that interests me personally. So there was one chat, I think it's in Buenos Aires, you're having this chat with someone talking about being raised in a Catholic school, but the moment that you decided, the moment that you gave up your belief was when Jesus didn't talk to you. You take it very literally,
Yeah, of course.
And then you said something like, I can't remember exactly how you said it in Spanish, but you said, I currently don't believe in anything. Something, I think that's what you said, right? Yeah. And when you said that, I was like, that's really curious, because reading your stories, I personally don't want to believe that you don't believe anything. And why is that? Because that Fox Mulder poster from X-Files, the one that says, I want to, I have it right above my bed, because I don't know if I believe, whether in whatever sense, in a lot of things, but I definitely know I want to believe. And I was just wondering about your relationship to belief in terms of the fantastical, in terms of horror, in terms of what you're dealing with in the novel. Like, how far does it go? Where's the lingering line? Because the story itself makes me want to believe, sometimes to terrify me,
Yeah. No, I understand what you say. I think what I wanted to say is that I'm not religious anymore.
Right.
I mean, and but I think I'm in the same space with I want to believe. I'm very open to things. I'm not dismissive of anything. Like if someone is is religious, I'm okay with it. If it's not a bigot, because it can happen. And I'm very open to the paranormal, because it's like, what is real anyway? What is real is actually what you were saying. What you believe is real. So in your mind it is, even if it doesn't happen. And sometimes the problem to me is that I've seen it gone very wrong, like spiritualistic thing, magical things. Like people get very, especially in a Catholic country, because it's very mixed with guilt. So people can go very superstitious and think they're doing things to them, and all that is kind of, I use it a lot in my fiction because it's kind of very damaging too. And but yeah, there's I guess there's a spiritual dimension. I think I was reading the book of conversations with Nick Cave the other day, and he says something very interesting, that it's very difficult to think that we are just this, even when you are agnostic or whatever, to believe that this is just it, then there's nothing else. And I'm not talking about children or this, no, but that we're just there's something. There has to be, if I believe in something, is I believe in some kind of purpose. It's the same as in fiction. Like I have to believe the purpose, so I have to, you know, believe in the purpose, not of us, of our lives, but of this that we share together to mean something to someone. You know, no, I don't know who, but I can't believe it's just, you know, something that happened. Yes, of course, it's a biological progression, whatever, but why? And in that, I kind of, but religion, no. Though I really like Catholicism. I think it looks great.
It does look great. Yeah.
It looks, yeah, it looks amazing. I would like to, but you know, they lied to me, so it's over.
Yeah, I recently watched the new Pope by Sorrentino, and I was like,
oh yeah,
it's great.
it looks great. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with Jude Law there. Yeah, it's interesting that you say about the belief, right? And that you're saying about your grandmother being like a sort of historical materialist to the core.
Yeah.
Because if you want, obviously there's a perfect examples of beliefs, beliefs not seeing themselves as belief.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the effects of that and how far that can go. Thinking
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. Like she was like completely religious in a way. Completely, like a, you know, that kind of very hardcore political thing. It's fanatical, and it really becomes religious. So, you know, I didn't buy that either, but I know a lot about that, and I think I have an influence of that from my father too. That was kind of more moderate, more like a socialist. But the notion of class and the notion of class being more important than other things, and many things that you can see in the writing there certainly come from there. And I acknowledge too that is kind of a system of, I don't know if belief, but thinking, especially in the way of my dad, a way to see the world. I see the world like that first.
Yeah, I mean, even the story we were talking about previously, the cop, this I and thou, so easy to dismiss, and then find yourself, you know, the boundaries that there were class boundaries constructed in the story between the different characters and classes. You know, yeah. So I said I had a few questions about short fiction.
Yeah.
So last year one of our readers, Emily Westmoreland, she had a chat with one of the judges, who's a translator and writer, Anton Her, and they got talking about the fact that that Anton felt, well, even and so Emily both felt that it maybe was a bit that short fiction was harder to sell in the Anglophone world than it was in Korea, and so Anton was translating Love in the Big City by Sang-Yong Park, and he kept telling him not to refer to it as a collection of stories, but as a composite novel.
Okay, yeah.
And it's definitely true that, you know, as a bookseller, sometimes there's a bit of extra work to do to try and sell someone a book collection of short fiction, and maybe this is changing, I don't know. But, you know, as you mentioned, the history of and importance of short fiction in Argentina and Latin America in general, I was wondering, have you seen anything like this with the movement of your writing into the Anglophone, Francophone, any other sphere, especially now that the novel is out? Have you seen anything like this?
It's very strange what happens with because, for example, in Britain, I think the shorts, they all work the same. Like there wasn't like much of a difference between the short stories and the novel in the reception. Of course, it's like a not massive, but they did good, but they all did the same good. I mean, it was not like the novel broke and then the short stories were like less. I think maybe the Booker had to do with that, but even I know, you know, many novels in the Booker, I don't even know the name. I forget about them completely. So it's not. Yeah, it does do a push, but I believe less and less about those kind of pushes. They do, but it's not very long. It's for a while, you know, it's 2 weeks and then move on to another thing. And in France, for example, it's even stranger because in France they don't know what is even less short fiction than the Anglophone world. I mean, the Anglophone world has the O. Henry Prize, has amazing, very famous short story writers, and especially in my field, let's say in the UK, like Robert Aikman, or or I don't know, there's many, and I'm talking about the gods and goddesses to me, like Kelly Link, for example, and she does very well. I mean, there is kind of a space for it, especially in genre, because the fantastic and the and horror works very good in short. And there's anthologies, there's another kind of tradition, but in France there's nothing like that. Like they and the other day I was doing an interview, and they're saying, like, it's very strange what's happening with your short stories here, because people don't read short stories, and they even call, like in language, to me, like, they don't call it short stories, they call it nouvelles. That is the way we call a short novel, basically, in Spanish and in English. And a nouvelle is a short novel, and for them it's short stories. Kind of weird, and I don't know what's happening. I mean, I come from a tradition where everything, no, but most of the big writers are short story writers. Cortázar, Borges, Silvino Campo, you can go on, and even the novelists are novelists, like Cesar Aira, for example, that might be the most famous Argentinian right now. His novels are very short. So I come from that is my tradition. So coming with a big thing like Our Share of Night is not very Argentinian. It's a bit more like Latin America, from Bolaño to Garcia Marquez and stuff, that they have this very, very big narratives that we read a lot. But here, short stories never have a problem, but it's kind of an island thing. I don't think it's changing that much. I think it's changing in the consideration of the critics and stuff. Like, for example, with Samantha Schweblin or even Otessa, short stories that are amazing. They did quite good, but they haven't done as good as her novels, of course. And I think they're equally good. I mean, I think her short stories are much better than Eileen. I really like Eileen, but I mean, for example, any of them are like to me. But I don't know what it is, because you would think that something short that doesn't need that much attention, and you can read in the subway, like it would be more, sought after than a novel, but it's not. So it's kind of difficult to understand why, but I don't think it's changing that much. I think it's much difficult to sell short stories, and maybe a writer that has a name has it easier with the short stories, but it's kind of in between, no? It's kind of the novel, and then come the short stories, that is kind of a little bite that you have before the novel. And I just finished a book of short stories, so I don't, and it really came, and it wasn't a novel. I'm going on a novel now, but it wasn't a novel, and I'm sorry, but that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It sort of feels like one of those market-driven things, like not now so much, but previously there was this thing where everyone wanted to call science fiction speculative. I mean, they still do call science fiction speculative fiction, because you wanted to give it some like credo. You're going to make it sound like not like genre fiction. Because that sells now. Like, so maybe it's similar. I don't know. Maybe there's a pretension around the history of the novel. I don't know.
I don't know what it is, but yeah, as there's also so many bad novels, so it's kind of because it takes a lot of time for you. You put a lot of time on something that is like kind of awful, and many are short stories that are fed on. Like, I can see, because I read a lot in prices and stuff like this, so I can really see when it was a short story and there's an editor there when I'm in a price that is feeding this thing chapters to make it a novel, and it's like, this would work so much better in a short story. Maybe not in a short story, but in a short story with a certain length.
Yeah.
But these 20 chapters in the middle are just telling me the same. That happens a lot.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I
I
think,
think that's a commercial thing, no, only like let the person have, you know, her short story or his short story. Come on.
yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things that's actually it's really lovely to chat and also have you as a judge because of the success of, I mean, it's kind of proof of the contrary, you know, because often one of the things we try and do is we really, with the shortlist, we make this book 11 stories and then we send it out to people as a PDF. We, you know, we sell it obviously, but we also send it out to agents.
Yeah.
And almost always the information we get back is, do they have a novel? Do they have a novel, a second novel like planned? Because, and so now I've got the habit of saying to people, you know, if we send it out, do you have a novel? I ask people because because that's what often agents tell me they want to see. Not all of them, obviously, but for sure, yeah. So I guess people padding it out makes it's yeah. I was actually going to say again because now we're in the 6th year of the prize, and see these some of them stay. We see the like trends. Some of them stay. Some of them come. Some of them go. Of like the kind of themes or types of writing that come in. And I was wondering if you have seen this at all in your reading over the past years, not necessarily for prizes, but you know, kind of things emerging and or disappearing that you've seen come and go, or not so much.
I think that what's definitely is emerging or establishing is the weird. It's kind of amazing, especially in Spanish, how much the weird. I say the weird because I you know I put there all the genres, kind of made that jump into something not completely respectable, but quite. And I can see it too happening in other languages, like for example, a lot with women, like Julia Armfield. I just ended Our Wives Under the Sea, for example. It doesn't matter if I loved it or not. It's a horror movie. It has Lovecraftian elements, and it's a love story too, and it's definitely very, very weird. And this is a novel that, like, she's very young, and it was very well reviewed. And I think this novel, like 20 years ago, nobody would know what to do with this thing. It was like, whoa, she goes to the depths of the sea and then becomes an axolotl. I mean, it's what? And the novel is told like in a very, you know, they're a couple, and this happens to her and the wife, you know, it's, and the tone, like I don't want to go on a lot about it, but I just finished it and I was very happy that a young writer and a young woman like that has the freedom of publishing that novel, getting good reviews. And she was in Argentina last year in a festival, you know, and getting a lot of exposition with something that is so deeply strange. Like, it's absolutely strange, this thing. And that is something that I see emerging, like Daisy Johnson, Lauren Groff. Like, there is kind of you know, a weird kind of thing. And I think that what is still there, but it's kind of lingering a bit, is the let's call it autofiction or self-referential literature. I think it reached a plateau that maybe needs other experiences, or maybe we need to read a bit more. I think the pandemic has to do with this, that we want to know about other realities. And when I say other realities, I don't mean other realities of one person and what she's or he or they are going through, but this kind of fictions that maybe are absolutely crazy but talk about reality in a different way. I was reading Solenoid too. Mircea Cartarescu is a thing like this, and you know, it's translated in Spanish and it's not a big hit, but it works. And he's a very respected writer. and an Oscar that made his name with the, with the, I don't know what it is, septology or whatever. I read 3, and because I mean, it's not like I don't like it, but I see it how it's winding down. His last novel is a horror novel, and an 800, because he can do short, can he? But it's an 800 pages horror novel, and yeah, that is something that I kind of see, because it's I think Ishiguro was one of the first writers to understand it. There was not that you could have Remains of the Day, and you can have Never Let Me Go, because it's not opposite, like, but it wasn't that common. It was a writer that is doing this or is doing that. And I think now, the deeply weird experience of the pandemic, and the fact that this is going on, this conversation that we are not, we're through time and space having, this is very weird. And not weird our conversation, but that can happen. That we live in a very softly weird things, but if you scratch a bit, the things that we're living in are deeply strange. So I think that there's there's an emergency of that, and I'm not saying because I write in that, but because I'm finding it a lot. And I remember, like 15 years ago, for example, it was very difficult to me to find something like that. And now it's everywhere. Even like a writer, like 15 years ago, I had to go to George Saunders, because George Saunders in 10th of December and stuff like that had very realistic narrative. His style is absolutely beautiful, but he had some kind, some sci-fi, some kind of extremely weird in his very mostly, let's say, American kind of narrative. But then you can find, for Cormac, with the certain breaks, I remember, like Cormac McCarthy with The Road. This is a writer that is almost biblical, epical in his violence and in his deep realism and very cruel realism. Then he comes with The Road. That is a zombie novel. It is. And you can call it a existential brothers, father son. I use it a lot in Our Share of Night, but it's a zombie novel. And the same way that Beloved is a ghost story. But you have these things, and then now you have a lot of them, and it's that is something that I see emerging at the same time that I see autofiction winding down.
It's so interesting, because when I was reading the novel and then like listening to do chat, talking about Golden Dawn, talking about Crowley, it's funny because this stuff kind of started. We have this one customer who is a legend. I love this guy. He's bought more Crowley than anyone I've ever met, and he like bought the complete. I mean, really, he bought his complete magazine. 10, 11 volumes when he was writing it, and then now, so we got them in, then we kind of got a few more in, and then they kind of sold, and then they got more in, and now people are just, they love it, And I know that in Brooklyn bookstores there, people have been buying it for a while, but just that's here. And then the British Library, I don't know if you've ever seen these, they've republished all the weird stories series. There's like 15, 20 of them. Amazing. Like weird stories.
Oh, wow.
Oh, they're amazing. Weird stories about insects, insect like horror, sound horror, food horror, and there's like a collection about it. And they do really well. And so yeah, I definitely have.
Yeah. And definitely in other things, like I was in France and in January, and the two biggest art exhibitions, one in Petit Palais was Walter Sickert. That you can say he was a realist. Okay, but he's suspected to be Jack the Ripper, which was not at all in the exhibition. But then you go to the shop, and the shop was full of Jack the Ripper paraphernalia, and I know he's not. I mean, the theory has been absolutely been debunked, but doesn't matter. Like that was used to sell that. He doesn't, to me, I mean, I think it's amazing, doesn't need any selling. But the other one was the other big one was of this, I can't remember his name, but he's a German painter that did The Nightmare, with the woman lying down with the succubus on it, and and it was full of people, full, like you can't move inside the thing, full people. And this is France. I mean, France is, the places are small, but this was like a big space. And we were like that, watching like witches flying in paintings with 25-year-olds in goth clothes. And I haven't seen this since the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
and I do think the last years with the death here, and this sense of that something very foreign and sudden can change your world one day to the other, especially in places where they had lives, because I know this, but in places like they had it all more figured out. I wasn't expecting a pandemic, but then you can have your money taken from the bank here. It's not something so strange. So I think that's why here the tradition of the strange in general, including magical realism, is very close to reality. And to us, it's not very strange to use genre or whatever to talk about reality, because reality is very, very crazy. So there's not many ways. But in places that they think they got it more figured out, I always say they think, because anything can happen. And if we were having this conversation instead of now in 1939, our positions would be the opposite. I would say, you are in big trouble, man. We are like, we are just sending you food. So, time has that too. So, to me, I think the sudden strangeness of the pandemic, and also the way it like kind of disappeared, and we kind of forgot that we were like cleaning everything and the toes of our animals and things like that, and the resilience that it got, and that we went, I mean, that moved something in our minds, where we need some narrative that is not so prosaic, let's say, and it needs a bit of trying to make something with this very, very strange event. And I think deeply, I mean, it's not something that you can articulate, but when I think about this, what happened? Well, this happened.
Yeah, how did you feel about that? It's funny when you said that about. I remember when I used to live in Paris. I used to work at Shakespeare and Company, the bookstore there.
Yeah.
And before I left, they had this big exhibition at the Orsay, and it was about the kind of the other side of the Enlightenment. It was amazing. And but I wondered how you felt about that. It just really made me think when you said, these kids who are goths, because just how did it make you feel about seeing like maybe a different generation looking similar to how you, because when I was a kid, I'd have to constantly get in fights when I looked how I looked in the street. People would always be like, yeah, I had long hair, I was a goth. People would be like, I'm coming from the north of England, just not acceptable. Whereas I think maybe now it's a lot more of a variety, it's a bit more acceptable. I mean, was there a generational thing, like generational recognition? I don't know.
No, I think I don't think kids this day know anything about the past. Like, it's truly. And I think it's because they are. I mean, nostalgia was very trendy with millennials, I think, but now no. And it's okay. They're rediscovering it. It's okay. I mean, it doesn't bother me, but no, I don't get the generational mirror, let's say, because I think they get it from other references.
Right.
Like I got it from Crowley, from Baudelaire,
Right.
from you know, from paintings, from Alfred Kubin, from reading I don't know, the very dark Germans, you know, all those references from, yeah, my movie was The Hunger. I mean, that was,
Mm.
and for this case I think it's Stranger Things, and I'm
Yeah.
not saying it in a bad way. I mean, like, really, it's their world, it's what it is, but
Mm.
it's more Stranger Things and, you know, maybe Wednesday.
Mm.
And who I love, by the way, I think she looks amazing, but it's more like that. I mean, it's a different kind of, and also it's the last night I went, I'm kind of, because last night I went to a Mayhem show, and like I was in a black metal show last night in the heat wave, like it's a miracle we're here. And there was a lot of young people too, but what I remember, it was contemporary. I remember buying Spin magazine, I think, and reading in Spin magazine the story of the crimes and of the burned churches and everything, and I was like, to be honest, I was like, how cool is this? And and was like the really criminals, man. And it was, I think it was like the acceptance of darkness, and that has to do, I think, with the literature, was very much legitimate. Like, we didn't think twice about, I had like a fixation with serial killers, for example, and I remember going out with some serial killer t-shirt. That is something I would never do today.
Mm.
And because I have more conscience of the victims. I'm not everything is bad. What I say is that it was different.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't have the mirror, because the references we had were absolutely different. And yesterday it was funny because many of the bands, and even Mayhem and the other black metal bands, were like, we are so happy we're seeing young people here. And it was like, come on. I mean, it was funny because it was like, yeah, but they're here for different reasons. We are here because we are 50 50 years old, the same age. And because that, it was so exotic too. There was no internet, and you got this magazine with these crazy Norwegian kids who were killing each other and had bands. And it was like, I know it's bad, but I want to know about it.
Mm.
And now it's the stuff of, because they have so you know, the span of time is so short that it was like to them it's legends. The other way, Lollapalooza happened too yesterday. Sorry for a tangent, but it's kind of interesting. And the main band was 21 Pilots. I don't even know who they are. And I said to my husband, Google them and let's YouTube a bit to see what it is. And we were 20 minutes in it. We were like, no, like, no. If we're going to listen to hip hop, we listen to Kendrick. We don't listen to, I mean, no. And we're starting to see the comments, and the comments was like, this is mythic, this is legend. And I remember when I was young, to call something legend, it had to be Lou Reed,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
21 Pilots. Like, what? I mean, so and I insist, it's not, to me, it's something that I'm more curious about and interested in than judgmental. But
Mm.
I truly feel and see that something honestly changed, that and I'm different from young people, and I come from a different mentality. So it's okay. That's life. But I wasn't, people our age, I think you're younger than me, but more or less the same age. I think we thought that we were going to be young forever. And no. And it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to realize that, they listen to things that I'm like, why? And and it's
Yeah.
okay. That's probably what the people of my age thought when I was listening to the stuff I liked.
I wonder if this is to do with, because I've got a question coming in a second about building of plot and building of story, but I actually think this
Yeah.
might tie in a little bit, because I remember one of the books when I was a kid, 15 or something, that I mean, literally it blew my mind, was that Marilyn Manson autobiography. I
Oh
was
yeah,
like, that some of the stuff. I mean, it's obviously entirely fictitious.
of course.
But it blew my mind. I mean, really, I was just like, the stuff with his grandfather down in. I was like, I mean, really, like,
Yeah.
but you say I bought the ticket. I was like, I'm in, and
Yes.
this is it, and I wonder if that's to do with like information, right? Because that the information I was given, I had access to this and this alone. I couldn't read around it. If this book comes out, this is very easy to like deconstruct the narrative around it, because you can just find out. Whereas this
Yeah.
came to me in some small town in the north of England, and I was like,
Yeah.
a holy object.
Yeah.
So maybe,
Same. Same. It was like that. It
yeah,
was like that. It was these holy objects that you kind of build a narrative around it.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually that kind of ties a little bit into, because I was chatting to friend of mine who has he's a bookseller too. Actually, he has a bookstore in Valencia called Todos Contentos y Yo También, and
Oh,
he's
nice.
yeah, a great name. And he's from Buenos Aires, and we were chatting about the process of putting a story together and the fact that we'd be talking, and he was saying that one of the things that always struck him about your writing is the fact of kind of leaving writers on an edge, both in terms of the feeling we take away, but also plot wise.
Mm-hmm.
If I could say, like, to come back to again to Rambla Triste, this feeling that
Yeah.
we're given a small peek into like some terrifying notion or way of thinking about a certain socioeconomic issue, for instance, tourism, or in El Raval in Barcelona, and then we're allowed to leave. The characters are allowed to leave. We're allowed to leave as
Mm.
readers. So there's like this moment where we're given just the right amount of information to terrify the shit out of us, and then we
Mhm.
then we leave, And
Yes.
it's something he was wondering about whether this is something you plan or you build in, the sense of knowing when to stop giving information or when to stop the story to kind of protect the fantastical element.
I sometimes when I in the like in the kitchen of the things, sometimes I write it all. And then I start to take away, which is something very common that a writer does. But when you're doing genre, is knowing what are the gross out things that you have to leave to make the moment, and the disgusting moment that has to me, it has to be there sometimes, and which is the amount of scary things that you have to leave. So it's a different kind of skinning the thing. I skin it like every writer, I think, skins it, but in general you have to skin it in a different way. Like I was talking to a friend in sci-fi, and he was like, it's difficult in sci-fi because in sci-fi you go into names, moons, numbers, and it's like how many you take to make the story still consistent.
Right.
In horror is different because what you have to keep in mind is how much explanation you give. Not enough explanation, it looks lazy. Sometimes it happens to me, it happens to everybody. Too much explanation is boring. So the where you are walking is it's very narrow. And in general, because there's not one answer to this. In general, I skin it until I reach like the core of what scares me about it. Like in Rambla Triste, for example, what scares me of the story in general is, on one side, that this place has a history that nobody knows, or very few people know, especially the tourists, and it was like gentrified to hell. And where are all these people? It's like a massive disappearance of things. It scared me a lot, the fact that so many of my friends were there, and I felt not that they were trapped, but yes, that they were lying in the sense that they were saying we're having a great life in Barcelona, and it wasn't true, but they didn't want to talk about it with us because it made it seem that it was a mistake what they've done, and nobody wants to be it was like giving up. I don't know. But that was really scary to see the difference between what they told me and the life. And then many of the stories that they told me about that place, that is a very touristic place, but they, I go and pick legends and urban legends and stuff. They were very scary. Like the woman with no head with the baby. That is all things that they told me. And I found out like in the little, little books that you buy, they are like the most horrific stories. And then this is very disposable touristic shit, but sometimes you find things there that are absolutely amazing, and it's part of the lore. So with these three things in mind, I start to skim and see three different ways, not make the metaphor of the gentrification the story, not make my fear of migration of people my age the story, and not making it all about the ghosts of Barcelona, but finding the equilibrium between those three things that scare me and that probably would scare the reader, although one will be the most scary of them all for the sensibility of the people that reads. So to me, it's all about, displaying all the information like a journalist and then taking away. And the plot I kind of always know before. I kind of sit with the plot in mind. Then comes the cleaning of it. But the plot I always know, and most of the time I know the ending, not the exact words, but I know where it will end. And most of my endings are open, but not because I don't know what happens, but because I think it's kind of honest to say, you don't really know where things go, because we don't know where things go. And it's kind of open is, to me, closing a bit too much, especially in a short story, a plot, is giving the reader some kind of closure and comfort that is not what the story is about. I don't want to tell you, for example, in Rambla Triste, no, the children are okay, and the tourists are okay, and and what happened to the people in this neighborhood is not that bad. That would be what a closure, putting all the dots together would mean to me, like a Sherlock Holmes thing, and everything goes back to normal. No, things are not going to go back to normal. That's why they're open, not because I don't know, but because it's impossible to know.
Yeah. Like I think I originally, when I was reading the novel and I was putting together questions, I had this question, which now has occurred to me again, about the kind of allegory of addiction a little bit, because and then Juan, who says, like, in a way, he wants to give up performing the right, but in a way can't. And then you look at the kind of the house, how the house is, how he treats his family, his child. You look at the kind of drawing back to it, the mania, the coming and going. And I think anyone who's been around that, they really struck a lot of chords with me. And I didn't ask it because I thought, it suddenly occurred to me that maybe that it wasn't, I don't need to draw it out necessarily, but that this is kind of implicit in the whole thing you were talking about before of power and wanting to hold on to power. Like these threads, they're all connected in that way anyway. They kind of, I don't know if I'm making myself particularly clear, but it's not like it needs to be an allegory of addiction. It's just that that's inherent in these power structures, in these compulsions that we have that live with us every day.
It is, yeah. I was very close to it, like personally too, so I understand it. And when I was talking about that, I need to understand.
Exactly.
That's something I understand. And even if sometimes it's irrational. I mean, when you find yourself 3 a.m., like, living someplace and in desperation trying to look for the dealer and treating everybody like garbage, it is irrational. But to you have like the motive at that moment. So this, is something I understand and that I know and that I use a lot in the because violence has that too. I talked to people that had problems with the law and violence and stuff, and they told me, one told me something that was very open in my mind. Like he said, it's like a tattoo. And I said, like, how can you compare robbing with a tattoo? He said, yeah, you get your first tattoo and then you want more and then you want more and then you want more. And with doing illicit things and violent things, it's a bit like that. It's like, what if one more? What if I get bigger? What if and it is like an addiction too. It's not only obviously just an addiction, but the addictive element I can understand. So that is, yes, it's implicit in the whole novel. That's why I didn't had a character that is 100% an addict, for example, because I think it's in all it's in all of them, even especially in the order, and especially in a character like Florence that goes to those lengths to even destroy, to she destroys her child. And that really, writing that really reminded me of the circles of addicts, where everybody's telling you go, 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 and you keep on, destroying everything that is around you, and but with your friends you're okay. That kind of dynamic is a dynamic that I understand. So I don't know if it's an allegory, but it's definitely there, because to me it's something that to me is motive. To me is something that even if people that are lucky not to haven't gone through it in a family member of themselves or a friend or that environment, maybe they don't get it that much. But to me, as a writer, it's it's something that comes very natural when I have to ask me about why does he need to do this? Well, he doesn't need, but he can't help himself. And that to me is all the answer that you need if you understand where I'm coming from. It's like, I can't help myself, I'm sorry. Or I'm not sorry. But eventually I will be, but not now. So there is I'm very thanks for picking it up, because not that many people pick it up, but it's there. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's this thing about, the kind of peeking behind the curtain thing, the just what, you want to, what if, there's that present too. Yeah.
And the secret too. Many of of our addictions are, and our toxic behavior in substances, in violence, in compulsive things that we do, that it could be the internet too, are done in secret, because we are, or it's illegal, or we are ashamed of it. So it's kind of the secret is part of it too.
Is this because you've judged prizes before? Have you judged short story prizes before? Yeah. Is there anything particular that you value or look for in here, which comes back to your own writing of stories, right? But is there anything...
I think in the short stories it's a lot easier to hear the voice of the writer. Like in the novel has meanders, and it depends on the style of the novel, you can see too. But the short story, you are a bit more naked. So it's not something that I look for as in genre specifically, but yes, in a voice, someone that I read and I say, wow, what is this? Who is talking here about what things? Something that surprises me, that it doesn't have it could be the matter or the plot or something very trivial, but the way he's telling it, where he's coming from, that's the kind of surprise, not originality, but personality. That's what mostly I'm looking for, because a writer without personality to me, it kills everything. And also what's interesting about judging short fiction is that, well, first they're short, but that's not minor. I'm not being ironic. With a novel, it can start pretty good and then it goes very wrong, and you're already 40 pages into it, and you're saying, what should I do? Do I give it 40 more to, in a way, you're naked that way, like you see it all.
Yeah.
You see in the short story, you see it all. You see what he can do, you see what he can't do, not in a bad way, but you can see we all have things that we can't do. And in a novel, there could be more disguised, or you can think, well, here he got in this kind of mess, but maybe no. In the short story, the short stories are cruel that way, because you can, even if the person sends one that she or he or they consider is the best one, and there's always judgment errors that way. And then if he would send the other one, it happened to me a lot, that sometimes we choose, like, for example, in one of the I've done, there were 10 that we had to choose, between 10, and there were like 5 we really didn't like. So the other judges that got like the whole lot of them, because that's what the mechanics were like, were instructed to also pick, I think, another 10 as, if we didn't like them. And those are the 10 which were amazing. I mean, and that happens a lot. I mean, the short story is like, it's more like a song, like,
Yeah.
I prefer track 2, you prefer track 1, and no, but the last one, like, it's a bit like that. So that is very interesting, because it shows a lot of you as a reader, not only as a judge of what you admire in writers. So I really like it, and I think it's very, very different to judge a novel. And in a way, and this is not only because I'm a short story writer, but short stories to me are not very difficult to write, but they're very difficult to get right. That is different. You can write, they're short, you can do a lot, but to get it right, that's very, very difficult. I think it's less difficult in a novel, because we are more forgiving with novels. We can say, the middle was, but then the ending, or, oh no, the middle was amazing, but the ending was not, but I liked it anyway. But a short story,
Yeah.
if it doesn't work, you forget it in a second. And if it's good, you never forget it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something very magical of a short story. Like, I remember when I was little reading Bradbury, and there's some stories of Bradbury I still remember now. And it's not the same with his novels, for example, that to me are not that memorable somehow.
Yeah. What was the last piece of writing? If it's a short story, they're great, but what was the last thing that like really blew your mind?
That blew my mind.
Yeah.
That's difficult, because one thing is to like it,
Like
and
something,
another
right?
thing, yeah. Well, as short stories, there's this I want to take the name right, so I'm going to look for it. But it's a writer, an American writer. Her name is Laura Vanderberg, and the book is called "I Hold a Wolf by the Ears." I mean, it's short stories, and it's like, I was reading. I never get envious. I mean, it's like, even if I get envious, like, I think, wow, why is she so good? I always get enthusiastic about it. And this was a book, came like a couple of years ago. I'm kind of very strange about time lately, but I think that was a book that I thought, I want to write. it made me want to write. It made me feel the novel was unnecessary. Like every short story was so powerful and so well done that it was like, why bother with a novel if you have 20 novels here that are all good? Grace Paley used to say something like that. Like she used to write short story. Alice Munro too, because they didn't have the time, and at the same time, why? If in the short story you can have everything, it's kind of true. But if I have to name a book that really blew my mind, that book blew my mind. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I don't have it. I will get it in.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. You said that you had just finished a collection of short fiction. Is there anything you can tell us? You can tell me, but you have to kill me, or can you just tell me?
No, I can tell you. I just sent it the second version to my agent, so it will be to go to the publishers soon. 11 short stories, going to be 12, but I decided that one wasn't about it. And I think they're a bit different too. They're longer. They're not novellas or anything, but they're longer. They have a more, it's I think more narrative and less. It's not that edgy. I think it's a bit more gentle in a way, and I think I got that a bit from the kick I had writing my share of night. That our share of night. That to me before this book, I think the characters were just like peons. They were like things I moved to get the idea to you, or the various ideas of what I was trying to talk about. That here I think relationships and the voices of the characters when they speak in the first person are not just vehicles for the idea, but they are more fleshy. I think it's a very technical thing, but I think that's what it is. And then there's the usual, a bit of gender violence, a bit of dictatorship, a bit. There's a bit that I found quite strange, because I always wrote to this point about young people. And in this, not in all of them, but in many short stories, started appearing people my age and older. And it's amazing to write in voices that I haven't tried. And I think it has to do, weirdly, with the things that we've been talking about I don't feel young anymore. I don't feel old either. But feeling young is something else. And I wanted to write about characters that are not necessarily old people, but in their 40s or whatever, but they don't feel young anymore. They're not teenagers. They won't do whatever. So it's more, they're less daring maybe, and things happen to them and surprise them when they're, wanting a quiet life and can achieve it. That it's maybe nearer a deep place that maybe I'm in now. Yeah. But they're still quite scary, I think.
Great. That's it. I mean, there's loads of more questions, but we've been talking almost 2 hours.
Okay.
We can stop the recording in a second, and then I'll have a chat about some other stuff. But so I'll just say on the recording, thank you so much for chatting with us, and I hope you enjoy the short fiction we sent to you, and we look forward to seeing your new book when it comes out.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm gonna stop.
And bye.